He pointed to the maid, in front of everyone. Laughing loudly, he made an absurd proposal. "Dance for me, and I'll marry you." Everyone burst out laughing, expecting to see her humiliated. But she just took a deep breath and accepted. What no one knew was that every step of that dance carried a secret that could destroy him and free her forever. Subscribe to our channel here and be moved, because what she did next, no one in that room would ever forget. Alice Duarte moved through the opulent ballroom like a ghost, her black uniform a stark contrast against the sea of glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic rainbows across marble floors, while champagne bubbled in baccarat flutes. She carefully balanced on silver trays. The mansion's grandeur was overwhelming. Oil paintings worth millions adorned the walls, and fresh orchids from Thailand perfumed the air with exotic sweetness. She had worked dozens of these elite gatherings, each one a window into a world where her monthly salary equaled what these people spent on a single bottle of wine. Tonight's event was particularly extravagant, celebrating the 5th anniversary of Vasconcelos Industries' latest acquisition. The guests, politicians, business moguls, socialites, moved in choreographed clusters, their laughter sharp as champagne bubbles bursting. Alice understood the unspoken rules of these events. Staff were invisible, functional extensions of the furniture. They were expected to appear when needed and vanish when not, never making eye contact, never speaking unless spoken to. She had perfected this art of invisibility over 3 years of catering work, becoming a master of reading the room's energy without being noticed herself. But tonight felt different. Perhaps it was the way conversations halted mid-sentence when she approached, or how whispers followed her movement between groups. She caught fragments of discussion, merger details, vacation plans to Mykonos, complaints about their children's expensive private schools. Each snippet reminded her of the vast chasm between their worlds. The ballroom's centerpiece was a magnificent mahogany dance floor, currently occupied by couples performing a refined waltz. Alice recognized the music, Chopin's waltz in D-flat major, and felt an unwelcome pang of nostalgia. Her fingers unconsciously traced the familiar rhythm against the tray she carried, muscle memory awakening despite her attempts to suppress it. She delivered champagne to a group of women discussing their latest cosmetic procedures, their faces eerily smooth under the chandelier's glow. They didn't acknowledge her presence, continuing their conversation as if she were merely another piece of furniture. This was normal, expected. Yet tonight, their dismissal stung more acutely than usual. Moving toward the mansion's owner, Alice prepared herself mentally. Leonardo Vasconcelos commanded attention effortlessly. Tall, impeccably dressed, with the kind of confidence that came from never doubting one's place in the world. He stood near the fireplace, regaling a captive audience with what was undoubtedly another story of his business conquests. As she approached his circle, offering champagne to his guests, Alice felt the familiar weight of his gaze. Unlike the others, Leonardo didn't treat staff as invisible. Instead, he seemed to study them, cataloguing details with the same intensity he brought to business negotiations. When their eyes met briefly, she saw something that made her stomach tighten, recognition mixed with cruel amusement. "Ah, our dedicated server," he said, his voice carrying easily across the group. "Tell me, do you enjoy watching people have fun, or does it make you wish you could join us?" The question hung in the air, like smoke from expensive cigars. His guests shifted uncomfortably, uncertain whether to laugh at what might be harmless banter or cruel mockery. Alice maintained her composure, offering a polite smile while internally screaming. "I find satisfaction in ensuring everyone's enjoyment, sir," she replied carefully, her voice steady despite her racing heartbeat. Leonardo's smile widened, predatory and calculating. She recognized that expression from long ago, the look of someone who enjoyed having power over others, who thrived on making people squirm for his entertainment. Some things never changed. The group gradually dispersed, drawn to other conversations and diversions, but Alice lingered, collecting empty glasses with practiced efficiency. She could feel Leonardo's attention like heat from the fireplace, studying her movements with uncomfortable intensity. Years of practice had taught her to read people quickly, and Leonardo Vasconcelos radiated the particular cruelty of someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions. Wealth and influence had insulated him from accountability, creating a man who viewed other people as entertainment rather than human beings deserving of basic respect. As she prepared to move to the next group, Alice caught sight of her reflection in the ballroom's gilt mirrors. The woman looking back appeared ordinary, unremarkable, exactly what these circumstances required. But beneath that carefully constructed facade, memories stirred like sediment in still water, threatening to cloud the clarity she had fought so hard to maintain. Tonight would be different. She could sense it in the way the music seemed to beckon, in how the dance floor called to her despite years of deliberate avoidance. Something was building toward an inevitable confrontation, and Alice Duarte was no longer certain she possessed the strength to remain invisible. Leonardo Vasconcelos surveyed his domain with the satisfaction of a king observing his court. The evening had proceeded flawlessly. Deals were being discussed over cognac, alliances formed through carefully orchestrated conversations, and his reputation as the ultimate host solidified once again. Yet boredom crept in, as it always did when success came too easily. He thrived on challenge, on moments that tested his ability to command any situation. Business negotiations provided some excitement, but they had become predictable. His opponents knew his reputation, approached him with preemptive defeat, already coloring their strategies. Where was the thrill in conquering those who surrendered before the battle began? His gaze wandered across the assembled guests, seeking something, anything, to elevate his interest. Politicians discussed legislation that would benefit his companies. Their wives gossiped about social hierarchies, and his business partners recounted familiar stories of their latest acquisitions, all so terribly ordinary. Then his attention fixed on the serving staff, moving efficiently through the crowd. These people fascinated him in ways his social equals never could. They possessed a vulnerability that wealth couldn't purchase, an authenticity born from genuine stakes in every interaction. When he spoke to them, their responses mattered in ways that differed fundamentally from the calculated flattery he received from peers. The dark-haired server caught his interest, particularly. Unlike her colleagues, who maintained careful emotional distance while performing their duties, she carried herself with subtle dignity that intrigued him. Her movements were too graceful for someone whose only training came from catering work, and her eyes held depths that suggested experiences far beyond serving champagne to the wealthy. "Ladies and gentlemen," Leonardo announced, his voice cutting through the ballroom's chatter with practiced authority. Conversations halted as attention focused on him, exactly as he intended. "I find myself in need of entertainment." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. They recognized this mood, knew from previous gatherings that Leonardo's spontaneous performances often provided memorable moments, though not always pleasant ones for their targets. "You see that charming young woman there?" He gestured toward Alice, who had frozen mid-step, tray balanced perfectly despite the sudden scrutiny. "I have a proposition that might amuse us all." Alice felt blood drain from her face as hundreds of eyes turned toward her. The ballroom's warmth became suffocating, crystal chandeliers seeming to press down like glittering weights. She understood instinctively that whatever Leonardo planned would not end well for her. "My dear," Leonardo continued, his tone carrying false warmth that fooled no one, "I wonder if you might indulge an old man's whim, dance tango with me, right here, right now, and I promise to marry you." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the musicians seemed to hold their breath, uncertain how to respond to such an outrageous declaration. Then laughter began, tentative at first, then building to a crescendo of cruel amusement that echoed off the ballroom's vaulted ceiling. "Leonardo, you're terrible," gasped Countess Morera, dabbing tears of mirth from her eyes. "That poor girl looks absolutely mortified." But Alice didn't look mortified. As the laughter continued around her, she set down her tray with deliberate precision, her movements controlled, despite the chaos surrounding her. The gesture was so unexpected that gradually the laughter began to fade. "Are you serious about this proposal?" she asked, her voice carrying clearly across the now quiet ballroom. Leonardo blinked, momentarily taken aback. He had expected tears, perhaps angry protests, certainly not this calm inquiry that turned his cruel game into something resembling an actual negotiation. "I am a man of my word," he replied, recovering his composure while studying her face for signs of the breakdown he still expected. "Dance with me, and I will indeed marry you, though I suspect you'll find the prospect less appealing once you consider the reality of attempting to tango in front of 300 witnesses." The crowd murmured appreciation for his recovery, but something had shifted in the room's atmosphere. Alice stood perfectly still, her dark eyes fixed on Leonardo with an intensity that made him unexpectedly uncomfortable. "Then I accept," she said simply. If the earlier silence had been complete, this one was absolute. Leonardo felt his confident smile falter as he processed her words. She was supposed to flee in embarrassment, not accept his impossible challenge. The script he had written for this entertainment was being rewritten by someone who should have been powerless to change it. Recovery came quickly. It always did. "Excellent," he declared, though his voice carried less certainty than before. "Musicians, if you please, something suitably passionate for our impromptu performance." As the band scrambled to prepare, Leonardo approached Alice with growing unease. Her acceptance had transformed his simple cruelty into something far more complex, and he found himself wondering if he had just made a terrible mistake. But it was too late for retreat. 300 pairs of eyes watched expectantly as he extended his hand toward a woman whose calm acceptance had just transformed his ballroom into a stage for something neither of them could predict. The word hung in the air like a musical note that refused to fade. Yes. Simple, definitive, impossible to misunderstand. Alice's acceptance reverberated through the ballroom with the force of a bell tolling, and suddenly Leonardo found himself in uncharted territory. He had orchestrated countless social manipulations over the years, each one following predictable patterns. Present someone with an impossible choice, watch them squirm, then graciously release them from the trap while cementing his reputation as someone who could command any situation. It was a formula that had never failed him, until now. Alice stood before him, her hand extended with the same confidence he had seen in business partners worth billions. No trembling, no hesitation, no sign of the intimidation that should have overwhelmed someone in her position. The serving uniform that had marked her as invisible moments before now seemed like a costume she was preparing to shed. "You do realize," Leonardo said, his voice carrying a slight edge as he grasped for control, "that I'm not joking about the marriage proposal. My word is my bond, particularly in front of witnesses." "I understand perfectly," Alice replied, her voice steady as granite. "Do you?" The question landed like a physical blow. In her calm acceptance, Leonardo heard an implication that chilled him. She knew something he didn't, held cards he couldn't see. For the first time in decades, he felt the unfamiliar sensation of being outmaneuvered. The crowd pressed closer, sensing drama that transcended their usual evening entertainment. Conversations ceased entirely as 300 of the city's most influential people focused on the unlikely pair at the ballroom's center. Cell phones appeared discreetly, ready to capture whatever emerged from this unprecedented confrontation. Leonardo glanced toward the musicians, who waited uncertainly with their instruments. "Libertango," he commanded, choosing Astor Piazzolla's most challenging composition. If she truly intended to proceed with this madness, he would at least ensure her humiliation was complete. The first notes pierced the silence like a knife blade, sharp, demanding, unforgiving. This was not ballroom tango for amateur dancers, but the authentic Argentine form, requiring years of training and innate understanding of the music's passionate complexity. Surely now she would retreat, recognizing the impossibility of what she had accepted. Instead, Alice smiled. It was not the nervous smile of someone about to be humiliated, nor the desperate grin of someone clinging to false bravado. This smile carried genuine warmth, mixed with something that looked disturbingly like anticipation. She moved toward the ballroom's center with fluid grace that made Leonardo's chest tighten with unwelcome recognition. "Shall we begin?" she asked, extending her hand toward him. Leonardo took her hand automatically, his business instincts screaming warnings he couldn't quite articulate. Her palm was smooth but not soft. These were hands that had known work beyond carrying serving trays. Her posture as she prepared for the dance's opening position was flawless, achieved without conscious effort. The crowd formed a rough circle around them, everyone desperate to witness what promised to be either spectacular humiliation or something far more extraordinary. Leonardo caught fragments of whispered commentary from the assembled elite. "This should be quick. Poor girl has no idea what she's gotten into. Leonardo's being unusually cruel tonight." But other voices carried different observations. "Look at how she holds herself. Those aren't the movements of an amateur. Something's not right here." As the music's intensity built toward the first movement, Alice positioned herself with precision that made Leonardo's breath catch. Every angle of her stance, every subtle adjustment of weight and balance spoke of training that went far beyond casual lessons. This was muscle memory developed through years of serious practice. The realization hit him like ice water. She actually knew how to dance. More than that, she knew how to dance well. Leonardo Vasconcelos had built his fortune on reading people, on identifying their weaknesses and exploiting them for maximum advantage. Now, as he prepared to begin a tango with a woman who had just shattered every assumption he'd made about her, he understood that tonight's entertainment was about to become something entirely different. The music swelled, demanding movement, and Alice's eyes met his with steady confidence that spoke of secrets yet to be revealed. In that moment, Leonardo realized he had not trapped her in his cruel game. She had trapped him in hers. The first step revealed everything. Alice moved into Leonardo's arms with the fluid precision of someone for whom tango was not performance, but language, a vocabulary of motion learned through years of dedication and sacrifice. Her body spoke in perfect dialogue with the music, each note translating seamlessly into movement that commanded attention from every witness in the ballroom. Leonardo, despite his shock, was no amateur himself. Wealthy men often acquired artistic skills as social accessories, and he had spent considerable time learning classical dances. But as Alice led them through the opening sequence, he realized the vast difference between competence and artistry. She danced like someone with nothing left to lose. Each step carried weight beyond mere technique. There was story embedded in every movement, emotion that transcended the physical mechanics of heel strikes and leg extensions. Her embrace held both invitation and challenge, drawing him into a conversation conducted entirely through motion, while simultaneously asserting her equality as a partner rather than a victim of his cruel entertainment. The crowd's murmured commentary shifted from anticipation of humiliation to genuine appreciation for what they were witnessing. These were people who attended the finest cultural events, who could recognize excellence when confronted with it. What they saw now was not an untrained server attempting to dance above her station, but a trained artist reclaiming her medium. "My God," whispered Professor Mendez, director of the National Dance Academy, to his companion. "That woman is extraordinary. Look at her line, her control. She's had serious classical training." As the music intensified, Alice's movements became more complex, incorporating elements that revealed the depth of her background. Her leg extensions achieved perfect angles, her spins maintained flawless center, and her facial expression conveyed the passionate melancholy that authentic tango demanded. But beneath the technical mastery, Leonardo sensed something deeper, a sadness that permeated every gesture. This wasn't merely dancing, it was catharsis, the physical expression of grief and loss that words could never adequately convey. Each step seemed to release something that had been held captive for too long. Memories flooded through Alice as she danced, unstoppable as tidewater. The studio where she had spent countless hours perfecting her craft, mirrors reflecting infinite versions of her younger self, struggling toward perfection. The competitions where she had begun to make her mark, earning recognition from judges and peers alike. The scholarship to study in Buenos Aires, where tango masters had praised her natural understanding of the form's emotional depths, and then the scandal that had destroyed everything. It had started small, accusations of improper conduct during a prestigious competition, whispers about her personal life that had nothing to do with her dancing ability. The rumors might have remained contained within the dance community, but they had been amplified by someone with both the power and motivation to ensure her complete destruction. Someone who now held her in his arms, leading her through steps that felt like walking through her own grave. The crowd began to respond differently as the dance progressed. Initial laughter and cruel anticipation transformed into respectful silence, then growing appreciation for the artistry they were witnessing. Cell phone cameras captured every moment, but the recordings felt more like documentation of something significant rather than evidence of someone's humiliation. "She's magnificent," breathed Countess Moreira, the same woman who had laughed at Alice's predicament only minutes before. "How did none of us know she could dance like this?" Leonardo felt the shift in the room's energy, understanding that his intended entertainment was becoming something beyond his control. Alice's dancing was rewriting the evening's narrative, transforming her from victim to protagonist while relegating him to the role of supporting player in her story. But there was something else in her movements, something that spoke directly to memories he had spent years trying to suppress. The way she held her head during certain passages, the particular grace of her arm movements, the passionate intensity she brought to the music's most complex sections. These details awakened recognition that he desperately wished to ignore. As they moved through the dance's climactic sequences, Alice's eyes met his with steady intensity that conveyed a message clearer than words. She remembered everything, forgave nothing, and was finally ready to reclaim what had been stolen from her. The music built toward its crescendo, and Alice's dancing reached heights that left the assembled crowd breathless. This was no longer about humiliation or social manipulation. This was about truth being expressed through motion, about justice being served through artistry. Leonardo realized with growing dread that his cruel game was about to become something far more dangerous. A reckoning. The music's intensity triggered memories Alice had spent 3 years trying to suppress. As her body moved through familiar patterns, her mind traveled backward to a different ballroom, a different life, a different version of herself who had believed in justice and merit and the protection that talent was supposed to provide. Buenos Aires, 3 years ago. Alice Duarte, 24 years old, Argentina's most promising young tango dancer. Featured on magazine covers, courted by international dance companies, destined for a career that would have elevated her from comfortable middle-class origins to global recognition. The Valdez competition was to be her breakthrough moment, the prestigious event where established masters competed alongside rising stars, where careers were launched and legacies cemented. Alice had trained for 18 months specifically for this opportunity, perfecting routines that pushed the boundaries of traditional tango while respecting its emotional core. She never got the chance to perform them. Leonardo spun her through a complex sequence, his leading more aggressive now as he sensed the shift in her demeanor. But Alice's muscle memory was stronger than his attempt to control their movement. She countered his aggressive leading with subtle resistance that transformed their dance into something approaching combat. Beautiful, passionate combat conducted through steps and embraces. The accusations had come the night before her scheduled performance. Anonymous sources claiming she had violated competition ethics by receiving coaching outside the official program. Whispers about her personal relationships with judges, suggestions that her meteoric rise owed more to bedroom politics than talent. None of it was true. But in the world of professional dance, reputation was everything. Accusations alone could destroy careers, particularly for women who lacked powerful connections to shield them from scandal. Alice had tried to defend herself, presenting evidence of her legitimate training, character references from respected teachers, documentation of her competition history. It hadn't mattered. The crowd watched in fascination as Alice's dancing intensified, her movements carrying emotional weight that transcended mere performance. Tears streamed down her face, not from embarrassment, but from the release of suppressed grief that had poisoned 3 years of her life. She remembered the morning everything collapsed, waking to find her photo splashed across tabloid covers with headlines questioning her integrity. Phone calls from former supporters, suddenly distant and formal, explaining that circumstances made continued association impossible. The competition organizers, apologetic but firm, removing her name from the program to avoid controversy. Most painful of all had been watching from the audience as other dancers performed routines she could have executed blindfolded, knowing she belonged on that stage, but understanding that politics had rendered her invisible. And behind it all, pulling strings like a puppet master, had been Leonardo Vasconcelos. She hadn't understood his motivation initially. Their paths had crossed only briefly during a charity gala where she had performed for wealthy donors. He had approached afterward, complimenting her artistry before making increasingly personal comments that made her uncomfortable. When she politely declined his invitation to a private dinner, his charm had evaporated, replaced by cold fury that someone of her social station would dare reject his attention. "You'll regret this," he had said simply, and Alice had dismissed it as empty posturing from a man unaccustomed to hearing the word no. 3 months later, her career was over. The ballroom around them had fallen completely silent, except for the music's passionate strains. Alice's dancing had become something beyond entertainment. It was testimony, a physical recounting of injustice that needed no words to convey its truth. Leonardo felt his confidence crumbling as recognition dawned fully. The woman in his arms was not some random server he could humiliate for his amusement. She was Alice Duarte, the dancer whose career he had methodically destroyed out of wounded pride and casual cruelty. The woman whose talent had been so extraordinary that eliminating her had required the full weight of his influence and connections. As the music neared its climax, Alice's eyes met his with devastating clarity. She knew that he remembered. She knew that he understood what his actions had cost her. And she knew that tonight, finally, the truth would have its moment on stage. The dance had become her declaration of war, fought with beauty instead of weapons, with artistry instead of armies. And Leonardo Vasconcelos, for all his wealth and power, had just realized he was about to lose. The music reached its crescendo, And Alice made her choice. Instead of following the tango's traditional conclusion, she stepped away from Leonardo's embrace, her hands raised in a gesture that commanded attention from every person in the ballroom. The sudden silence was absolute. Even the musicians, confused by the unexpected interruption, let their instruments fall quiet. "Thank you," Alice said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. She spoke with the projection of someone trained in performance, ensuring every witness could hear her words. That was beautiful music for a beautiful dance. Leonardo reached toward her, attempting to resume their position, but Alice stepped gracefully away. Her smile was serene, almost peaceful, as she turned to address the assembled crowd directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for witnessing something important tonight. 3 years ago, my career as a professional dancer was destroyed by false accusations spread by someone with enough power to make lies sound like truth." The crowd stirred uneasily, recognizing that the evening's entertainment was transforming into something far more serious. Cell phone cameras that had been recording a novelty dance now captured what was beginning to feel like a testimony. I was 24 years old, representing Argentina in international competitions, with contracts pending from dance companies in 3 countries. I had trained since childhood for that opportunity, sacrificing everything that normal young women experience: relationships, social life, financial security, all for the chance to share my art with the world. Leonardo's face had gone pale. He gestured sharply toward the musicians, signaling them to resume playing and drown out Alice's words. But they remained frozen, uncertain whether to follow his commands or allow the moment to continue. "One man's wounded ego destroyed all of that," Alice continued, her voice growing stronger. "Because I wouldn't accept his dinner invitation, he used his connections to spread rumors that made me unemployable. He turned my passion into poison, my dedication into a weakness that others could exploit. This is inappropriate." Leonardo finally found his voice, but it carried none of his usual commanding authority. "You're here to work, not to make speeches." "I'm here," Alice replied calmly, "to dance, which is exactly what I just did, for the first time in 3 years. And I want to thank everyone present for giving me that gift, even if it wasn't your intention." She moved toward the ballroom's edge where she had left her serving tray, but continued speaking as she walked, her voice never wavering. "I don't want revenge. I don't want apologies. I simply wanted to remind everyone, including myself, that we are all human beings deserving of basic dignity. That talent exists in unexpected places, that worth isn't determined by bank account balances, and that sometimes the people you treat as invisible are the ones who see you most clearly." The crowd parted before her like water, no one daring to interrupt what had become a moment of raw honesty in a world built on careful pretense. Several women wiped tears from their eyes, recognizing something universal in Alice's story of dreams destroyed by powerful men who faced no consequences for their cruelty. "Tonight I didn't dance for marriage," Alice continued, reaching her serving tray and carefully folding the apron she had worn throughout the evening. "I danced for Alice Duarte, the girl who loved tango so much that she was willing to risk everything for the chance to share that love with others." She set the folded apron on the tray with ceremonial precision, the gesture marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of something undefined but full of possibility. "I hope you all enjoyed the evening," she concluded, her tone returning to the professional courtesy she had maintained throughout her service. "Thank you for your hospitality, and thank you for listening." The silence that followed was profound. 300 of the city's most influential people stood motionless, processing what they had witnessed. This was no longer about a servant disrupting their party. This was about truth being spoken in a place where truth was usually carefully managed and controlled. Then, impossibly, applause began. It started with Professor Mendez, the Dance Academy director, whose trained eye had recognized artistry when he saw it. His clapping was joined by others, first the musicians, then several women in the crowd, then spreading like wildfire through the assembled guests until the ballroom thundered with appreciation. Leonardo stood alone at the dance floor's center, the applause washing over him like an indictment. For the first time in his adult life, he found himself completely without allies, surrounded by people who had just witnessed his casual cruelty exposed and condemned not through accusations, but through the simple dignity of his victim's response. Alice walked toward the ballroom's exit, her head held high, the applause following her like a benediction. She had not sought their approval, but their recognition of her humanity felt like a gift she had never expected to receive. The applause died gradually, leaving Leonardo Vasconcelos standing alone at the center of his own ballroom, surrounded by 300 guests who now viewed him with expressions ranging from disappointment to outright disgust. The silence that followed felt different from the earlier quiet of anticipation. This was the silence of judgment, of social exile beginning to crystallize in real time. For 43 years, Leonardo had commanded every room he entered. Wealth, power, and carefully cultivated charm had made him untouchable, insulating him from the consequences that constrained ordinary people. He had built his identity around being the man who controlled narratives, who shaped outcomes, who never faced accountability for his actions, because accountability was for those without sufficient resources to avoid it. Tonight, that foundation had cracked. "Well," he said, forcing his voice to carry its usual confident tone, "that was certainly unexpected entertainment. I hope everyone enjoyed our little performance." But the words fell flat, landing in hostile silence. No one laughed, no one agreed. Several guests had already begun moving toward the exits, their evening irretrievably tainted by what they had witnessed. Countess Morera, who had laughed so heartily at Alice's initial predicament, approached Leonardo with an expression he had never seen directed toward him, pity mixed with contempt. "That was shameful, Leonardo," she said quietly, her voice carrying the authority of someone whose social position rivaled his own. "That girl showed more dignity in 10 minutes than you've displayed in years of knowing you. Carmen, surely you can't be taking the word of a disgruntled employee over—" "A disgruntled employee!" The Countess's voice rose sharply. "That woman is Alice Duarte. I saw her perform in Buenos Aires before her career ended so mysteriously. She was extraordinary then, and she was extraordinary tonight. The only mystery is why any of us tolerated your behavior as long as we did." Other guests were departing rapidly now, the evening's momentum destroyed beyond recovery. Leonardo watched his carefully orchestrated social event dissolving into whispered conversations and pointed glances in his direction. Professor Mendez paused before leaving, his expression grave. "I don't know what role you played in Ms. Duarte's career difficulties, but I intend to find out. The dance community is smaller than you might think, and we have long memories for injustice." Alone with his catering staff and a handful of die-hard socialites, too invested in his wealth to abandon him immediately, Leonardo felt the walls of his constructed world beginning to shift. The applause Alice had received echoed in his memory, highlighting the silence that now surrounded him. He moved to the ballroom's massive mirrors, ostensibly straightening his bow tie but actually studying his reflection with new, unwelcome scrutiny. The man looking back appeared successful, powerful, commanding, all the attributes he had spent decades cultivating. But underneath that carefully maintained exterior, he saw something that chilled him: emptiness. When had he become someone who destroyed careers for sport? When had causing pain become entertainment? The memories came unbidden. Alice declining his dinner invitation with polite firmness, treating him like any other stranger, rather than the influential figure he expected everyone to recognize. The fury that had followed, not at romantic rejection, which he barely cared about, but at being dismissed by someone he considered beneath his notice. He had destroyed her career almost casually, the way someone might swat an annoying insect. A few phone calls to competition organizers who owed him favors, strategic donations to dance academies contingent on certain dancers being excluded from opportunities, whispered suggestions about Alice's character that carried the weight of his reputation behind them. It had been so easy, and it had accomplished exactly what he intended, the elimination of someone who had dared treat Leonardo Vasconcelos as ordinary. But tonight, watching Alice reclaim her artistry in front of witnesses who recognized her extraordinary talent, Leonardo understood the magnitude of what he had destroyed. This wasn't about a career or even justice. It was about a light he had deliberately extinguished because it burned brighter than his own. The remaining guests were departing now, their conversations carried on in other rooms, other venues, other gatherings, where Leonardo's behavior would be analyzed and condemned. His reputation, carefully constructed over decades, was crumbling in real time. From across the now empty ballroom, he could see his reflection multiplied in the mirrors that lined the walls. Dozens of Leonardos staring back, all wearing the same expression of dawning realization. For the first time in his adult life, he was truly alone with the consequences of his actions. And he discovered that solitude was far more terrifying than any business negotiation or social challenge he had ever faced. Alice stepped through the mansion's ornate front doors and into the cool night air, feeling as though she were emerging from underwater after years of holding her breath. The weight she had carried for 3 years, the shame, the anger, the sense of incompleteness, had lifted, leaving her surprisingly lightheaded as she walked toward the street. Behind her, the mansion blazed with light and hummed with the subdued activity of a party, struggling to continue, despite its foundation being shattered. She could hear conversations through open windows, fragments of discussion about what they had witnessed, speculation about Leonardo's behavior, and surprisingly, praise for her courage in speaking truth to power. But Alice felt no triumph. Standing up to Leonardo had not been about victory or revenge. It had been about reclaiming her voice, her dignity, and most importantly, her relationship with tango itself. For 3 years, the dance she loved had been poisoned by association with her professional destruction. Tonight, she had danced without that burden, feeling the pure joy of movement and music that had first captured her heart as a child. Her small apartment was a 30-minute walk from Leonardo's mansion, a journey that took her through increasingly modest neighborhoods until she reached the converted warehouse building where she rented a studio space barely large enough for a bed, tiny kitchen, and the practice bar she had installed along one wall. As she changed from her catering uniform into comfortable clothes, Alice's phone began buzzing with notifications. Video clips from the party were already circulating on social media, shared by guests who had recorded her impromptu speech and the extraordinary dance that preceded it. The hashtags were already forming. Yes, Truth Tango, Dignity, Dance, Do Alice Duarte. But Alice turned off her phone without reading the comments or watching the videos. Tonight had been about healing, not publicity. Whatever happened next would unfold naturally, without her trying to control or manipulate the outcome. 3 days later, the first email arrived. Ms. Duarte, it began. My name is Isabella Rodriguez, Director of the Esperanza Foundation for Young Artists. We saw the remarkable video of your performance and would like to discuss an opportunity that might interest you. Alice read the message twice before believing it was real. The Esperanza Foundation was renowned for its work with disadvantaged youth, providing arts education to children who otherwise would never access professional training. Their dance program was considered one of the finest in South America, despite serving students who couldn't afford traditional academy tuition. The meeting took place in a converted church that served as the foundation's main facility. Isabella Rodriguez was a woman in her 50s. With kind eyes and hands that bore the calluses of someone who had spent decades dancing professionally before transitioning to education. We need someone who understands that dance is not just about technique, Isabella explained as she led Alice through classrooms where children practiced ballet, contemporary and traditional folk dances. Our students face challenges that privileged dancers never encounter. They need teachers who know that art can survive trauma, that beauty can emerge from struggle. Alice watched a group of teenagers working through a complex jazz routine, their movements sharp with determination, despite wearing mismatched practice clothes and dancing on a floor that had seen better decades. Their faces glowed with the same passion she remembered from her own youth, before politics and power games had complicated her relationship with dance. "I haven't taught before," Alice admitted, though part of her was already imagining how she might structure lessons for these eager students. "Teaching isn't about having the right credentials," Isabella replied. "It's about understanding what dance means to people who need it most. These children don't dance to become famous, they dance to become themselves." The position offered modest pay, but immense satisfaction. Alice would develop curriculum for the Foundation's new tango program, working with students aged 12 to 18 who had shown particular aptitude for the form's emotional complexity. Most importantly, she would have access to a proper studio space where she could continue her own practice and perhaps eventually return to performing. Alice accepted immediately. The news of her appointment spread through social media faster than she had anticipated. The story had captured public imagination, a talented artist destroyed by a powerful man's cruelty, then finding redemption through courage and grace. Journalists requested interviews, documentary filmmakers proposed projects, and several dance companies quietly inquired about her availability for future performances. But Alice declined most opportunities, focusing instead on her students and the gradual process of rebuilding her relationship with tango. The foundation provided exactly what she needed: purpose without pressure, artistry without politics, and the chance to share her love of dance with young people who understood its transformative power. 6 weeks after the party, Alice received an unexpected visitor at the foundation. Professor Mendez arrived during her afternoon class, watching quietly from the doorway as she guided 15 teenagers through the emotional complexity of tango's embrace. "Magnificent," he said after the students had finished their practice. "I haven't seen teaching like that in years." "They're exceptional students," Alice replied, toweling sweat from her face. "They bring honesty to the dance that's often missing in more formal settings." "Which is exactly why I'm here," Professor Mendez continued. "The National Academy is launching a new scholarship program for students from underserved communities. We need someone to direct it, someone who understands both technical excellence and social responsibility. The position comes with full faculty status and the opportunity to perform with our professional company." Alice felt her breath catch. The National Academy represented everything she had lost 3 years ago: prestige, recognition, access to the highest levels of dance artistry. But it also represented the world that had betrayed her, where politics mattered more than talent and powerful men could destroy careers with whispered lies. "I need time to consider," she said finally. "Of course. But Alice?" Professor Mendez paused at the studio door. "The dance world has been diminished by your absence. We're hoping you'll give us the chance to earn back your trust." That evening, Alice walked through the city centre, her mind churning with possibilities. The opportunity Professor Mendez offered could restore everything she had lost: reputation, career trajectory, financial security. But working with the Foundation students had shown her that success could be measured differently. That impact didn't require fame or institutional recognition. As she passed a cafe with outdoor seating, Alice noticed a familiar figure sitting alone at a corner table. Leonardo Vasconcelos looked older than she remembered, his usual confident posture replaced by something approaching humility. When their eyes met, he stood immediately, his expression uncertain. "Alice," he said quietly, I was hoping I might have the chance to speak with you." She could have walked past, could have ignored him completely. Instead, she found herself pausing, curious about what this man who had once held such destructive power over her life might have to say. "I won't keep you long," he continued, gesturing to an empty chair. "I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I took from you, and I wanted to ask if there's anything I can do to help repair the damage." Alice studied his face, searching for signs of manipulation or self-interest. Instead, she saw something she had never expected to associate with Leonardo Vasconcelos: genuine remorse. But some wounds couldn't be healed with apologies, no matter how sincere. Some consequences had to be lived with, learned from, and ultimately transformed into wisdom. "You can't give me back those 3 years," Alice said finally, "but you can learn from them. And maybe that's enough." She walked away without looking back, leaving Leonardo alone, with his regrets and her words echoing in the night air. Some chapters closed with dramatic confrontations. Others ended quietly, with understanding replacing anger and growth emerging from loss. Alice Duarte had found her way back to dance, but more importantly, she had found her way back to herself. 6 months had passed since the night that changed everything. Alice had accepted Professor Mendez's offer, splitting her time between the National Academy's scholarship program and her continued work with the Esperanza Foundation. The arrangement provided the best of both worlds: access to professional resources and the profound satisfaction of working with students who danced with their hearts wide open. Her return to the academy had been carefully orchestrated to avoid unnecessary drama. No press conferences or formal announcements, just a quiet integration back into the dance world that had once rejected her. The professional company had invited her to perform in their spring season, and Alice was considering it, though she no longer needed external validation to feel complete. The white envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under her apartment door sometime during the night. No postmark, no return address, just her name written in elegant calligraphy across cream-colored paper. Inside, an invitation printed on heavy cardstock. "The Esperanza Foundation for Young Artists cordially invites you to attend the inaugural performance of our new community outreach program. Reception to follow. RSVP not required." The date was 2 weeks away. The venue was the city's historic opera house, donated for the evening by an anonymous benefactor who had also funded the entire outreach program. Alice smiled, recognizing the foundation's excitement about this unexpected windfall that would allow them to expand their services dramatically. She almost discarded the invitation without attending. Foundation events, while worthy, were typically modest affairs attended by dedicated supporters and the families of participating students. But something about the elegant presentation and the opera house venue suggested this would be different. The evening arrived crisp and clear. Alice dressed simply, a black dress suitable for any audience, comfortable shoes that would allow her to move freely if the evening called for dancing. She arrived early, curious about how the foundation would use such a grand space for their community-focused mission. The opera house buzzed with activity as guests arrived. Alice recognized many faces from the foundation's regular supporters, but was surprised to see several prominent figures from the arts community, city officials, and even some faces from that infamous party months ago. The anonymous benefactor had clearly drawn from influential circles to support this event. The program began with performances by foundation students, their youthful energy filling the ornate theatre with joy and passion. Alice felt pride swell in her chest as she watched several of her own students perform pieces they had developed together, their technical skill matched by emotional honesty that professional dancers often spent years trying to recapture. During intermission, Alice stepped into the lobby for fresh air and found herself face to face with Leonardo Vasconcelos. He looked different, healthier somehow, as if some internal tension had been released. His usual commanding presence remained, but it was tempered by something that might have been humility. "Alice," he said quietly, "I wasn't sure you would come." "I wasn't sure you would be here," she replied, though without the hostility such an encounter might once have provoked. "I'm the anonymous benefactor," he said simply. "I thought you should know." Alice studied his face, searching for ulterior motives. "Why?" "Because 3 years ago I destroyed something beautiful out of petty cruelty," Leonardo replied. "I can't undo that damage, but maybe I can help create new opportunities for other artists to flourish without interference from people like me." "People like you?" Alice asked. "People who mistake power for worth, who think other human beings exist for their entertainment." He paused, looking around the lobby filled with young dancers and their families. "I've spent the last 6 months trying to understand how I became someone who could destroy a career and sleep peacefully afterward." "And what did you discover?" "That I was empty," Leonardo said simply. "I filled that emptiness with the illusion of control, with the belief that dominating others made me important. Your courage that night showed me how hollow that belief was." Alice felt something shift inside her, not forgiveness exactly, but a release of the anger that had sustained her through the darkest period of her life. Leonardo's transformation, if genuine, was his own journey. Her healing had already taken a different path. "The foundation will put your donation to good use," she said finally. "I hope so." "And Alice?" Leonardo's voice carried genuine warmth. "I hope you know that your dancing that night was the most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed. Not because of the technique, though that was flawless, but because of the courage it represented." The second half of the program featured a surprise performance, Alice herself dancing a piece she had choreographed specifically for this venue. As she moved across the Opera House stage, she felt the completeness of her journey from destruction to reconstruction, from silence to voice, from victim to artist reclaiming her power. The audience rose in sustained applause as she finished, but Alice's attention focused on a quiet figure in the back of the theatre. Leonardo stood with the rest, his expression one of genuine appreciation rather than the calculating assessment she remembered from their first encounter. After the performance, as the reception continued around them, Alice and Leonardo found themselves in a moment of quiet conversation. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we both continue becoming better versions of ourselves," Alice replied. "Separately, but perhaps with some understanding of how we got here." Leonardo nodded, extending his hand in a gesture of respect rather than dominance. Alice shook it briefly, feeling the strange closure of a chapter that had defined too much of both their lives. As she prepared to leave that evening, Alice looked back at the Opera House one final time. The building would host many more performances, tell many more stories, witness countless other moments of artistic triumph and human connection. Tonight had been hers, not as revenge or vindication, but as proof that beauty could emerge from ashes, that talent could survive attempts at destruction, and that sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty was simply to continue creating, growing, and dancing. She walked into the night with her head held high, ready for whatever music the future might play. "Now tell me, if it were you, would you have the courage to do the same?" She didn't fight back, she just danced. And in that room full of arrogant looks, she was the one who won. Comment below, what was the most powerful moment of this story for you? And tell me, from which country are you watching? I want to know how far this story has reached. Like, share, and subscribe. Here each story speaks straight to the heart.